Picture this. A woman walks into a high school for her first day teaching, carrying nothing but a briefcase and quiet confidence. The students size her up immediately, especially the group of boys who've terrorized every teacher before her. They see an easy target, someone they can break within weeks. What they don't see is the black belt she earned through years of blood, sweat, and determination. What they don't know is that she's faced down opponents far more dangerous than teenage bullies. This is the story of how one teacher's hidden strength turned a school upside down and taught everyone a lesson they'd never forget. The morning sun cast long shadows across Jefferson High School's parking lot as Elena Rodriguez pulled into her designated spot. At 28, she was younger than most teachers at the school, with long dark hair pulled back in a professional bun and eyes that held both warmth and steel. Her navy pantsuit was pressed to perfection, her sensible heels clicking with purpose as she walked toward the main entrance. This was her fresh start, a chance to make a difference in a new city after leaving behind painful memories in Chicago. Jefferson High sat in the heart of suburban Denver, a sprawling campus that served over 2,000 students from diverse backgrounds. The school had a reputation for academic excellence, but beneath the polished surface lurked problems that no amount of standardized test scores could hide. A culture of bullying had taken root, particularly among the senior class, where a group of athletes ruled through intimidation and fear. Elena had been hired to teach sophomore English, replacing a veteran teacher who'd taken early retirement after what the principal delicately called classroom management issues. She'd later learned the truth that Mrs. Henderson had been driven out by relentless harassment from students who saw kindness as weakness and respect as optional. As she entered the building that first morning, Elena breathed in the familiar scent of industrial floor wax and teenage anxiety. Students streamed past her in the hallway, their conversations a blur of weekend stories and Monday complaints. Some glanced at her with curiosity, marking her as the new teacher they'd heard about. Others barely noticed, too absorbed in their own worlds to care about another adult in their midst. Room 237 would be her domain, a corner classroom with large windows overlooking the football field. Elena arrived early to arrange the space to her liking, placing inspiring quotes on the walls and organizing her desk with methodical precision. Each detail mattered to her, from the way she arranged the desks in a semicircle to encourage discussion to the small succulent she placed on the windowsill as a touch of life in the institutional space. The bell rang for first period, and students began filtering in. Elena stood at the door, greeting each one with a smile and learning their names as they found their seats. Most responded politely, if somewhat surprised by the personal attention. Then they walked in. Connor Matthews entered first, all 6 feet 2 inches of athletic arrogance wrapped in a Letterman jacket. His sandy blonde hair was perfectly styled, his blue eyes scanning the room like a predator marking territory. Behind him came his crew. Brandon Torres, stocky and aggressive, with a permanent sneer etched on his face, and Ryan Chen, quieter but no less complicit in their reign of terror. The three of them had been best friends since middle school, bonding over sports and a shared enjoyment of making others feel small. Connor was the ringleader, blessed with good looks, wealthy parents, and enough charisma to talk his way out of most trouble. Brandon was the muscle, quick to use his size to intimidate anyone who crossed their path. Ryan was the strategist, smart enough to keep his grades up while orchestrating pranks that walked the line between mischievous and malicious. They took their seats in the back row without acknowledging Elena's greeting, already whispering and laughing about something on Connor's phone. She noted their behavior but didn't react, choosing instead to begin her introduction to the class. Good morning, everyone. I'm Miss Rodriguez, and I'll be your English teacher this year. Before we dive into the syllabus, I want you to know that this classroom is a safe space for all of us to learn, grow, and express ourselves through literature and writing. Connor snorted loud enough for everyone to hear. Safe space? What is this? Kindergarten? A few students giggled nervously, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Elena's expression remained calm, though she mentally filed away this first test of her authority. I understand that term might seem overused. Connor, she said, reading his name from her seating chart. What I mean is that everyone here should feel comfortable sharing their thoughts without fear of judgment or ridicule. That includes you. Brandon leaned over to Connor and stage whispered, she already knows your name. Bro. Teacher's pet material right there. More laughter rippled through the room. Elena continued with her introduction. outlining her expectations for the year and her passion for literature. She spoke about how stories could transport us to different worlds, help us understand different perspectives, and even change our lives. Most of the class seemed engaged, but the three boys in the back made a show of their disinterest. Connor even putting in earbuds until Elena quietly asked him to remove them. That first day set the pattern for what would follow. Elena taught with enthusiasm and patience, working to engage every student while Connor, Brandon, and Ryan tested her boundaries. They started small talking during lessons, making jokes at inappropriate times, turning in assignments late with elaborate excuses. Elena handled each incident professionally, never losing her temper but firmly maintaining her standards. What the boys didn't know was that Elena had spent the last 15 years training in Taekwondo, earning her third-degree black belt just months before moving to Denver. The discipline had saved her life in more ways than one. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in Chicago, she'd been a small, quiet girl who attracted bullies like magnets. Her parents, working multiple jobs to make ends meet, had scraped together money for martial arts classes after Elena came home with a black eye in 6th grade. Master Kim, her instructor, had been more than a teacher. He'd been a mentor who taught her that true strength came not from the ability to hurt others, but from the discipline to control oneself. Through years of training, Elena had learned to channel her fear into focus, her anger into determination. She'd competed at national levels, earning medals and respect. But more importantly, she'd found her center. The physical training had been grueling, hours of practicing forms until her muscles screamed, sparring sessions that left her bruised and exhausted, flexibility training that pushed her body to its limits. But the mental training had been even harder, learning to stay calm under pressure, to read an opponent's intentions before they moved, to know when to engage and when to walk away. These lessons served her well in the classroom. When Connor tried to derail discussions with provocative comments, she redirected with questions that forced him to think. When Brandon made subtle threats about how accidents could happen to teachers who gave too much homework, she smiled and assigned an essay on the theme of consequences in Macbeth. When Ryan submitted a plagiarized paper, she quietly returned it with a note, offering him the chance to redo it honestly, before she filed an academic integrity report. The boys were frustrated. Previous teachers had either ignored them to avoid conflict or engaged in power struggles they inevitably lost. Elena did neither. She treated them with the same respect and expectations as every other student, refusing to be baited into confrontation while never backing down from her standards. By the third week of school, they decided to escalate. The pranks became more elaborate and disruptive. They superglued her desk drawers shut, requiring maintenance to spend an entire afternoon fixing them. They created a fake social media account in her name, posting embarrassing content until she discovered it and had it removed. They spread rumors about her personal life, making up stories about why a young woman would move to Denver alone. Elena documented everything, building a file of incidents while maintaining her composure in the classroom. She knew from experience that bullies fed on reaction, and she refused to give them the satisfaction. Instead, she focused on the students who wanted to learn, and there were many. There was Sophia, a shy sophomore who blossomed when Elena encouraged her poetry. David, a struggling reader who stayed after class for extra help and slowly began to improve. Maria, a recent immigrant who found comfort in stories about characters navigating new cultures. These students made the challenges worthwhile, reminding Elena why she'd chosen this profession. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon in October. Elena had kept her martial arts background private, seeing no reason to advertise it. But that day, Connor crossed a line that would change everything. The class was discussing To Kill a Mockingbird, exploring themes of justice and moral courage. Elena had just asked a thought-provoking question about standing up for what's right when it's dangerous to do so when Connor interrupted. "This is stupid," he announced, slamming his book shut. "Nobody cares about some old book. Why don't you teach us something useful? Literature helps us understand the human experience." Elena replied calmly, "The themes in this novel are just as relevant today as they were when it was written. Can anyone give an example of how prejudice and injustice still exist in our society?" Sophia raised her hand tentatively, but Connor spoke over her. "Here's an example of injustice having to sit in this boring class with a teacher who probably couldn't get a real job." The room went silent. Several students looked shocked, while others watched to see how Elena would respond. Brandon smirked, and Ryan had the decency to look uncomfortable, Elena took a breath, centering herself as Master Kim had taught her. Connor, that comment is inappropriate and disrespectful. Please stay after class so we can discuss it. Or what? Connor stood up. His height advantage meant to intimidate. You'll give me detention? Call my parents? They'll just donate more money to the school and nothing will happen. That's how the real world works. Not this fairy tale stuff you're teaching. He moved toward the front of the room, Brandon following with a grin. Other students shrank back in their seats, trained by years of witnessing the trio's behavior to stay out of their way. Sit down, Connor, Elena said firmly, not moving from her position by the board. Make me, he challenged. Now standing directly in front of her, the height difference was significant. Connor towering over Elena's 5'4" frame. What are you going to do? You think you're tough because you're a teacher? You're nothing. Just another loser who couldn't make it in the real world. So you hide in a classroom pretending to have power. Brandon laughed, moving to flank Elena's other side. Yeah. Miss Rodriguez, show us what you got. The air in the room was electric with tension. Some students had their phones out, ready to record whatever happened next. Elena knew this was the moment that would define her relationship with not just these boys but the entire school. Word would spread within minutes, and her response would determine whether she survived at Jefferson High or became another casualty of Connor Matthews and his crew. She looked up at Connor, meeting his eyes without flinching. I'm going to ask you one more time to return to your seat. This behavior is unacceptable, and there will be consequences. Connor reached out and swept her copy of To Kill a Mockingbird off her desk, papers scattering across the floor. Consequences? From you? You can't do anything to us. You're weak, just like all the others. In that moment, Elena made a decision not to attack, not to lose control, but to demonstrate that strength came in many forms. As Connor reached for more items on her desk, she moved. It was subtle, almost invisible to untrained eyes. She shifted her weight, pivoted on her back foot, and gently redirected Connor's arm away from her desk using a basic Taekwondo deflection technique. To observers, it looked like Connor had simply changed his mind mid-reach, but he felt the controlled power in her movement, the way she'd turned his own momentum against him without apparent effort. His eyes widened in surprise, and for the first time since walking into her classroom, uncertainty flickered across his face. Elena stepped back, hands at her sides, posture relaxed but ready. Return to your seat now, she said quietly. All of you. Something in her voice, in the way she stood, in that simple deflection, communicated more than words could. This was not a woman who could be intimidated. This was not a teacher who would run away. This was someone who had faced down real threats and emerged stronger. Connor hesitated, his bravado wavering. Brandon, less perceptive, stepped forward aggressively. Did you just touch him? That's assault. You can't put your hands on students. Elena's lips curved in the slightest smile. I used a defensive technique to prevent destruction of school property. Everything in this room is under surveillance. Brandon, the cameras will show exactly what happened. She gestured to the security camera in the corner that the boys had apparently forgotten about in their attempt at intimidation. The same cameras they'd avoided when pulling their pranks, but which had captured this entire confrontation. Ryan, always the smartest of the three, grabbed Connor's arm. Come on, man, let's go. But Connor's pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. This isn't over, he said, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. You think you're special because you know some self-defense moves? We'll see about that. They returned to their seats, but the dynamic had shifted. The other students looked at Elena with new respect and curiosity. Sophia was practically glowing with admiration. David sat up straighter, engaged in a way he hadn't been before. Even Maria, who usually kept her head down to avoid notice, was watching with interest. Elena picked up the scattered papers calmly, then continued the lesson as if nothing had happened. But everyone in the room knew something fundamental had changed. The new English teacher was not what she seemed, and Connor Matthews had just discovered that his reign of terror might have met its match. Words spread through Jefferson High like wildfire. By lunch, versions of the confrontation had circulated through every social circle, growing more dramatic with each telling. Some said, Miss Rodriguez knew Kung Fu. Others claimed she'd been in the military. A few creative souls suggested she was an undercover cop investigating the school. Elena went about her day as usual, teaching her classes and helping students. But she noticed the changes. Teachers who'd barely acknowledged her before stopped to introduce themselves and offer support. Students who'd been rowdy in her morning classes were remarkably well behaved in the afternoon. Even the principal, Mr. Washington, made a point of stopping by her room. "I heard there was an incident in your second period class," he said carefully. Mr. Washington was a cautious man, more concerned with avoiding lawsuits than addressing problems. "Connor Matthews can be challenging. Nothing I couldn't handle," Elena replied, "though I think a conversation about appropriate classroom behavior might be beneficial." Mr. Washington shifted uncomfortably. "The Matthews family is very involved with the school. Donors. You understand? Perhaps it would be better to let this blow over." Elena fixed him with a steady gaze. "With respect, Mr. Washington, allowing students to intimidate and disrespect teachers is how we ended up with the culture problem this school clearly has. I'm not asking for special treatment. Just support in maintaining basic classroom discipline." He left without committing to anything. And Elena knew she was on her own, but she'd been on her own before and survived worse than entitled teenagers. The next few days were tense but quiet. Connor, Brandon, and Ryan attended class but didn't participate. They turned in assignments and avoided direct confrontation. But Elena could feel them watching her, planning something. She disrupted their sense of power, and they wouldn't let that stand. Meanwhile, her other students flourished. Free from the constant disruption and intimidation, they began to engage more deeply with the material. Discussions became livelier. Students who'd never spoken up before started sharing their thoughts. Elena introduced creative projects that allowed them to connect literature to their own lives, and the response was enthusiastic. She also started staying after school to offer extra help, and word got around that Miss Rodriguez's room was a safe place to study, to talk, or just to exist without fear of harassment. A small but growing group of students began gathering there regularly, finding community and support. Among them was Jessica Park, a junior who'd been one of Connor's favorite targets, overweight and artistic. She'd endured years of cruel comments and accidents that left her books scattered or her art supplies destroyed. She came to Elena's room initially just to hide, but gradually began opening up about her experiences. "He's going to retaliate," Jessica warned one afternoon. "Connor doesn't like losing face. He and Brandon and Ryan. They'll plan something big." Elena looked up from the essays she was grading. "I appreciate the warning, Jessica, but I want you to know that bullying is never acceptable, and you don't have to face it alone anymore. You don't understand," Jessica insisted. "Last year, Mr. Campbell tried to stand up to them. They planted drugs in his car and called in an anonymous tip. He was cleared eventually, but the scandal ruined his reputation. He transferred to another district. This was new information, and Elena filed it away carefully. She'd known the boys were problematic, but framing a teacher suggested a level of malicious planning that went beyond typical teenage rebellion. "Thank you for telling me," Elena said. "I'll be careful. But Jessica, I need you to understand something. I've faced bullies before, ones who were older and meaner and had actual power. These boys might think they run this school, but they're about to learn that actions have consequences." What Elena didn't tell Jessica was that she'd already anticipated escalation. She'd installed a discreet security camera in her classroom, backing up footage to a cloud server. She documented every incident meticulously, and she'd reached out to contacts from her competition days, including a lawyer who specialized in education law and a private investigator who owed her a favor. The storm broke on a Friday afternoon in early November. Elena had announced a major project presentation day, where students would share their creative interpretations of classic literature. The atmosphere was excited but nervous as students prepared to present their work. Sophia had created a series of poems inspired by Emily Dickinson. David had written a modern retelling of a scene from Romeo and Juliet set in Denver. Maria had prepared a multimedia presentation comparing immigrant experiences in The Namesake to her own family's story. Connor, Brandon, and Ryan had submitted the bare minimum, a hastily thrown-together poster about The Great Gatsby that looked like it had been completed that morning. They slouched in their seats as other students presented, making whispered comments and clearly planning something. Halfway through the presentations, as Maria was sharing her deeply personal project, Connor stood up abruptly. "This is boring," he announced loudly. "Nobody wants to hear about her sob story." Maria froze, tears welling in her eyes. The room went silent. everyone waiting to see how Elena would respond. "Sit down, Connor," Elena said firmly. "Maria has the floor." "Or what?" Connor moved toward the front of the room. "You'll do your little martial arts move again? That only works once." "Teacher." Brandon and Ryan stood as well, forming a triangle around Elena's desk. Other students shrank back, some pulling out phones to record what was about to happen. "I think it's time someone taught you a real lesson," Brandon said, cracking his knuckles. "About respect." Elena stood slowly, moving away from her desk to give herself room. Her body language remained calm, but her senses were on high alert. She recognized the setup: 3 athletic young men trying to intimidate a smaller woman, counting on their size and numbers to win. "The only lesson being taught here today is about literature," she said evenly. "Return to your seats immediately." Connor laughed. "An ugly sound. Make us. Come on. Show us those moves you think make you special." He stepped forward aggressively, reaching out as if to push her. This time, Elena didn't hold back. Moving with the fluid grace of years of training, she sidestepped Connor's reach, caught his wrist, and used a classical Taekwondo wrist control technique to guide him past her. To the watching students, it looked effortless, like Connor had simply tripped over his own feet. He stumbled, catching himself on a desk. Brandon charged forward with a roar, relying on brute strength. Elena pivoted, using a defensive stance from her competition days, and redirected his momentum with a gentle push that sent him careening into the whiteboard. The magnetic poetry words scattered like confetti. Ryan, seeing his friends humiliated, made the mistake of trying to grab Elena from behind. She sensed him coming, dropped her weight, and executed a simple escape technique that left him grasping air while she stepped safely aside. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. Elena hadn't thrown a single punch or kick, hadn't hurt anyone, but had demonstrated complete control of the situation. The 3 boys stood there, breathing hard, egos bruised more than their bodies. "That's assault," Connor sputtered, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "You can't attack students." Elena straightened her blazer calmly. "I used minimal defensive techniques to protect myself and my students from aggressive physical threats." Everything was captured on multiple cameras, including the school's security system and, I'm sure, several phones. "Would you like to continue this discussion with the principal and the police?" The boys looked around, suddenly aware of how many witnesses there were. Several students were indeed recording, and their expressions weren't sympathetic to the bullies who'd terrorized them for years. "This isn't over," Connor hissed. "My father will have your job. You'll be finished in this town. Your father is welcome to try," Elena replied, "but he might want to review the footage first, along with the documentation I've compiled of your harassment, your pranks, and your threats. I believe framing Mr. Campbell with drugs last year might be of particular interest to the authorities." Connor went pale. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" Elena smiled slightly. "You'd be surprised what people are willing to share when they're no longer afraid. Now, you have 2 choices. Sit down and let Maria finish her presentation, or leave my classroom and don't return until you're ready to behave like civilized human beings." The silence stretched taut as a wire. Then Jessica stood up from her seat in the back. "I have proof," she said quietly, "about Mr. Campbell. I kept the texts where Connor bragged about it." Another student, Marcus, also stood. "I have screenshots of the group chat where they planned their pranks." One by one, students began standing, phones in hand, ready to share evidence of the boys' reign of terror. It was a moment of collective courage, inspired by one teacher's refusal to be intimidated. Connor looked around wildly, realizing that his power had evaporated in an instant. The fear he'd cultivated for years had transformed into defiance. Without another word, he stormed out of the classroom, Brandon and Ryan trailing behind him. Elena turned to Maria, who stood frozen at the front of the room. "Please continue your presentation. I believe everyone would like to hear your story." As Maria resumed with trembling voice that grew stronger with each word, Elena felt a shift in the room's energy. It was more than just the absence of the bullies. It was the presence of possibility, of safety, of respect. The students had found their voices, and they weren't going to be silenced again. The aftermath came swiftly. Connor's father, Richard Matthews, arrived at the school within an hour, demanding a meeting with the principal and threatening lawsuits. He was a successful businessman, accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and influence. Elena was called to Mr. Washington's office, where she found the principal sweating nervously as Richard Matthews paced the room like a caged predator. "This is the teacher who assaulted my son?" Richard demanded, looking Elena up and down dismissively. "She's half his size. Connor says she attacked him without provocation." Elena sat calmly, placing a folder on the desk. "Mr. Matthews, I have here documentation of your son's behavior over the past 2 months, including today's incident. I also have video footage from multiple angles showing that I used only defensive techniques when your son and his friends attempted to physically intimidate me." "Lies." Richard spat. "My son would never." "Your son bragged about framing Mr. Campbell with drugs last year." Elena interrupted. "Multiple students have evidence. Your son has been terrorizing this school. And it ends now." Richard's face went through several shades of red. "You can't prove anything. I'll have you fired. I'll make sure you never teach again." Elena stood, her presence filling the room despite her small stature. "Mr. Matthews, I've taught in inner-city Chicago schools where gang members tried to recruit in my classroom. I've faced down addicts with knives and parents who thought violence was the answer to everything. Your son is a bully, but he's an amateur compared to what I've dealt with. You can try to destroy my career, but I have evidence, witnesses, and the law on my side, or you can accept that your son needs consequences and help before he ends up in serious legal trouble." The room was silent. Mr. Washington looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Richard Matthews stared at Elena, perhaps seeing her clearly for the first time. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "Justice," Elena replied. "Your son and his friends will face appropriate disciplinary action. They'll apologize to every student and teacher they've harassed. They'll perform community service. And they'll attend counseling to address their behavior. Do this, and I won't pursue criminal charges for assault or press for an investigation into Mr. Campbell's case." It took 2 hours of negotiation, but eventually, an agreement was reached. Connor, Brandon, and Ryan were suspended for 2 weeks, required to complete 100 hours of community service, and mandated to attend anger management counseling. When they returned, they would be on strict behavioral contracts. The news spread through Jefferson High like wildfire. Students who'd lived in fear for years suddenly felt empowered. Teachers who'd given up trying to maintain discipline found renewed energy. The culture of the school began to shift. Slowly, but perceptibly, Elena's classroom became even more of a haven. Students stayed after school not just for help with English but to talk, to share their experiences, to learn about standing up for themselves. Elena started teaching basic self-defense techniques to interested students, always emphasizing that the real power came from confidence and awareness, not violence. She shared more of her own story during these sessions, how she'd grown up in Englewood, one of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, how she'd been bullied for being small, smart, and different, how her parents had saved every penny to pay for her Taekwondo lessons after she came home bloodied one too many times. She told them about Master Kim, who'd taught her that martial arts wasn't about fighting but about discipline, respect, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, about the hours of training, the competitions where she'd faced opponents twice her size, the moment she'd earned her black belt and realized that strength came in many forms. "The physical techniques are just tools," she explained to a group of eager students one afternoon. "The real power is here." She tapped her temple. "And here." She placed her hand over her heart. "When you know your worth, when you refuse to let others define you, when you stand up for what's right, even when it's scary, that's true strength." Sophia, who'd blossomed from a shy poet into a confident young woman, asked, "But what if we're not brave like you? What if we're too scared?" Elena smiled warmly. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear, Sophia. It's feeling afraid and acting anyway. Every time you read one of your poems aloud, every time you raise your hand in class, every time you refuse to let someone make you feel small, you're being brave." The weeks following the confrontation brought significant changes. Connor, Brandon, and Ryan returned from suspension, subdued and wary. They completed their assignments, participated minimally in class discussions, and avoided any behavior that might be seen as threatening. Connor, in particular, seemed different. The arrogance had dimmed, replaced by something that might have been reflection. He stayed after class one day, approaching Elena's desk hesitantly. "Miss Rodriguez," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with the words, I wanted to, I mean. My counselor said I should. He took a breath and started over. I'm sorry. For everything, I was a jerk. And I hurt a lot of people. Elena studied him carefully. Apologies are a start, Connor. But they need to be backed by action. How are you going to make amends to the people you've hurt? He pulled out a piece of paper, hands shaking slightly. I made a list. Everyone I can remember bullying. I want to apologize to each of them personally, if they'll let me. And I was thinking maybe I could use my position as team captain to start an anti-bullying campaign. Make it cool to be kind. You know, it was a beginning. Elena didn't entirely trust the transformation, but she believed in giving people chances to change. That's a good start. But remember, this isn't about making yourself feel better. It's about genuinely understanding the harm you caused and working to prevent it from happening again. Connor nodded, looking younger than his 18 years. My counselor is helping me understand why I acted that way. Stuff about my dad. And pressure. And taking it out on others. It's not an excuse. But I'm trying to do better. Brandon's journey was different. He struggled more with the counseling. His anger issues deeper and more complex. But he found an unexpected outlet in Elena's creative writing assignments, pouring his emotions into stories that revealed a depth hidden beneath the aggressive exterior. Ryan, always the follower, seemed lost without a leader to follow. He gravitated toward the debate team, finding a constructive use for his strategic mind. Elena watched him learn to argue positions based on logic and evidence rather than intimidation. Not everyone changed. Some students and teachers remained skeptical, and Connor faced backlash from former victims who weren't ready to forgive. But the overall atmosphere at Jefferson High continued to improve. Elena's innovative teaching methods gained recognition. She integrated self-defense principles into literature discussions, drawing parallels between physical and emotional strength, between the courage of literary heroes and the everyday bravery required to stand up to injustice. Her unit on To Kill a Mockingbird became legendary, with students role-playing scenarios about moral courage and discussing how to be allies against injustice. Her creative writing workshops produced powerful pieces about overcoming adversity, finding voice, and claiming power. The spring semester brought new challenges and triumphs. Elena was nominated for the district's New Teacher of the Year award, though she cared less about the recognition than about the letters from students telling her how she'd changed their lives. Jessica, who'd been Connor's victim for years, started a peer support group for bullying survivors. She'd found her voice and used it to help others find theirs. David, who'd struggled with reading, discovered a love for graphic novels and began creating his own. Maria's college essay about finding belonging in literature and in Miss Rodriguez's classroom earned her a full scholarship to the University of Denver. Even Connor's transformation, while incomplete, showed progress. His anti-bullying campaign, initially met with skepticism, gained traction when he publicly shared his own journey from bully to advocate. He spoke at freshman orientation about the cost of cruelty and the power of choosing differently. The year wasn't without setbacks. There were students who remained disengaged, parents who complained about Elena's methods, and administrators who wished she'd be less visible, but she persevered, drawing on the same discipline and determination that had carried her through years of training. Master Kim visited once, at Elena's invitation, to speak to her self-defense club. The elderly Korean man commanded respect without raising his voice, demonstrating techniques with an economy of movement that spoke to decades of practice. Miss Rodriguez tells me you are learning well, he said to the assembled students. Remember, the strongest warrior is one who wins without fighting, but when you must fight, fight for others, not for ego. He pulled Elena aside after the session. You have done well, my student. You teach them strength, but more importantly, you teach them wisdom. I had a good teacher, Elena replied, bowing respectfully. You had good spirit? Master Kim corrected. I only showed you how to polish it. As the school year drew to a close, Elena reflected on the journey. She'd come to Jefferson High seeking a fresh start, hoping to make a difference in young lives through literature and learning. She'd found that and more: a community, a purpose, and proof that one person standing firm could inspire others to stand with them. The final week brought a surprise. Connor approached her after the last class. This time accompanied by his father. Richard Matthews looked uncomfortable but determined. Miss Rodriguez, he began stiffly, I owe you an apology. When we first met, I was more concerned with protecting my son than understanding what he'd done. You were right. He needed consequences and help. Elena nodded, accepting the apology graciously. Your son has shown real growth this semester. That speaks well of both of you. Connor stepped forward. I wanted to give you this, he said, handing her an envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation he'd written for her Teacher of the Year nomination, detailing how she'd changed not just his behavior, but his entire perspective on strength and respect. I know it doesn't erase what I did, he said quietly, but I wanted you to know that you saved me from becoming someone terrible. My counselor says I have a lot more work to do, but you showed me it was possible to change. After they left, Elena sat in her empty classroom, surrounded by the quotes and student work that decorated the walls. Each piece represented a victory, small or large, in the battle against ignorance, cruelty, and fear. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophia, who'd just learned she'd won a citywide poetry contest. Another from David, excited about starting a book club over the summer. One from Maria, thanking her again for everything. Elena smiled, thinking about the next year's incoming students, the new challenges and opportunities they would bring. She'd continue teaching literature, but more than that, she'd continue teaching courage, respect, and the power of standing up for what's right. The summer break allowed Elena to reflect and recharge. She spent time training at a local dojang, keeping her skills sharp while finding peace in the familiar rhythms of forms and sparring. She also took advanced education courses, always seeking to improve her teaching methods. When August arrived with its back-to-school energy, Elena returned to Jefferson High to find her reputation had preceded her. New students eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and awe, having heard stories from older siblings and friends. Some came seeking protection, others testing to see if the legends were true. She addressed it head-on during her first-day introduction. Some of you may have heard stories about last year. Let me be clear, I'm here to teach English, to help you discover the power of words and stories. I'm also here to ensure everyone feels safe and respected in this classroom. We'll challenge ideas, not people. We'll debate with words, not fists. And we'll support each other in becoming better readers, writers, and human beings. The new year brought new dynamics. Connor, now a senior, had genuinely transformed into a leader for positive change. His anti-bullying initiative had become an official school program, with peer mentors trained to intervene in conflicts and support vulnerable students. He often stopped by Elena's classroom, not as the arrogant bully he'd been, but as a young man trying to make amends. Brandon had discovered a talent for creative writing, channeling his anger into powerful stories about redemption and second chances. His piece about a fighter learning to use his strength to protect rather than hurt won the school's literary magazine contest. Ryan had found his place on the debate team, learning to argue with logic and evidence rather than intimidation. He'd even started tutoring younger students in rhetoric and argumentation. But new challenges emerged. A group of junior girls had formed their own clique, using social media and psychological manipulation rather than physical intimidation to torment their targets. Elena had to adapt her approach, addressing cyberbullying and the subtle cruelties that left no visible bruises but deep emotional scars. She partnered with the school counselor to create workshops on digital citizenship and emotional intelligence. They brought in speakers who'd survived online harassment and parents who'd lost children to cyberbullying-induced suicide. The sessions were heavy but necessary, forcing students to confront the real-world consequences of their online actions. One particularly difficult case involved Emma, a sophomore whose private photos had been shared without consent by an ex-boyfriend. The girl was devastated, afraid to come to school, contemplating self-harm. Elena worked with administrators, counselors, and law enforcement to address the situation, while providing Emma with a safe space to process her trauma. People keep saying I should have known better. Emma sobbed in Elena's classroom one afternoon, that it's my fault for trusting him. Elena handed her tissues, her voice gentle but firm. What happened to you is not your fault. The person who betrayed your trust and everyone who shared those images, they're the ones at fault. You're not responsible for other people's cruelty. She helped Emma draft a powerful essay about consent, trust, and digital responsibility that was later published in the school newspaper. The piece sparked important conversations about respect and boundaries in the digital age. Throughout it all, Elena continued to weave literature into life lessons, Shakespeare's tragedies became discussions about toxic masculinity and the cost of unchecked ambition. Contemporary young adult novels open dialogues about identity, belonging, and resilience. Poetry workshops gave students safe spaces to express their deepest fears and highest hopes. Her self-defense sessions evolved too, incorporating verbal de-escalation techniques and situational awareness alongside physical moves. She taught students to recognize warning signs of potentially violent situations and how to extract themselves safely. The best fight is the one you avoid. She reminded them regularly, physical techniques are the last resort, not the first response. One memorable session involved role-playing various scenarios, students walking alone, dealing with aggressive peers, navigating uncomfortable social situations. Elena taught them to trust their instincts, use their voices effectively, and position themselves strategically. Your body language speaks before you do, she explained, demonstrating confident posture versus vulnerable positioning. Predators, whether in school hallways or dark alleys, look for easy targets. Don't be one. The impact rippled beyond her classroom. Other teachers began incorporating social-emotional learning into their curricula. The administration, initially resistant to addressing systemic issues, slowly embraced policy changes that prioritized student safety and well-being. Elena's second year at Jefferson High culminated in an unexpected honor. She was not only named District Teacher of the Year, but also invited to speak at the State Education Conference about integrating character education with academic content. Standing before an auditorium of educators, Elena felt the same calm focus she experienced before a sparring match. She spoke about the intersection of physical and emotional strength, the importance of creating truly safe learning environments, and the transformative power of believing in students' capacity for change. We teach more than subjects, she told the audience. We teach human beings how to be human, how to stand up for themselves and others, how to choose courage over cruelty, how to find their voices and use them for good. She shared Connor's story, with his permission, as an example of how even the most challenging students could transform when given firm boundaries, real consequences, and genuine opportunities for redemption. She talked about Emma's bravery in turning her trauma into advocacy. She celebrated all the quiet victories of students who'd found strength they didn't know they had. The presentation earned a standing ovation, but more importantly, it sparked conversations about how schools could better address bullying, support vulnerable students, and create cultures of respect and empowerment. Back at Jefferson High, the end of year brought bittersweet farewells. Seniors like Connor headed off to college, many choosing paths influenced by their experiences in Elena's classroom. Connor himself had decided to study psychology, hoping to work with at-risk youth. I want to be for other kids what you were for me, he told Elena at graduation. Someone who sees past the anger to the pain underneath. Someone who doesn't give up on them even when they've given up on themselves. Jessica had been accepted to art school, her portfolio filled with pieces about transformation and resilience. David was enrolled in a summer literacy program to prepare for college English. Maria had become a mentor for other immigrant students, helping them find their voices through storytelling. As Elena packed up her classroom for summer, she found notes and letters tucked into various books and corners. Thank yous from students she'd helped, apologies from those who'd initially resisted her methods, promises to carry forward the lessons learned in room 237. One note particularly touched her. It was from a quiet student named Alex, whom she'd barely noticed, who sat in the middle of the room and turned in average work without complaint. Miss Rodriguez. The note read, "You probably don't remember me much, but I watched everything that happened this year. I was one of the kids too scared to stand up to Connor before. Seeing you face him down, seeing him change, seeing everyone find their courage, it changed me too. I'm not scared anymore. Thank you for showing me that strength comes in different forms and that even quiet kids like me can be brave." Elena carefully folded the note and placed it in her keepsake box, along with photos from the self-defense club, programs from student performances, and other mementos of a transformative year. Each item represented a life touched, a fear conquered, a voice found. As she locked her classroom door for the summer, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a scared little girl in Chicago learning to defend herself, to a woman teaching others to stand tall. From facing down neighborhood bullies to transforming high school tormentors into advocates for change. The path hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of exhaustion, of wondering if one person could really make a difference against entrenched systems and behaviors, but standing in the quiet hallway, remembering the fear that had once permeated these spaces and feeling the hope that had replaced it, she knew the answer. Change was possible. Growth was achievable. Strength could be taught and caught and passed on like a torch in the darkness. And sometimes, all it took was one person willing to stand firm, to model courage, to believe in the possibility of transformation even for those who seemed irredeemable. Elena walked out of Jefferson High that day knowing she'd be back in the fall, ready for new challenges, new students, new opportunities to teach not just English but life, ready to continue showing young people that true strength wasn't about domination but about discipline, not about breaking others down, but about building everyone up. The girl who'd learned Taekwondo to protect herself had become a woman who used those skills to protect others. The student had become the teacher, and in classroom 237, the lessons would continue literature and life, words and wisdom, courage and compassion, all woven together in the ongoing story of growth, change, and the power of standing up for what's right. As she drove away from school, Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Master Kim. "Proud of you, my student. You have found your way." She smiled, knowing he was right. Her way wasn't just about martial arts or teaching. It was about empowerment, transformation, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserved a chance to discover their own strength. The summer sun set over Denver as Elena headed home, already planning for the next year. The next group of students who would enter her classroom uncertain and leave empowered. The cycle would continue, each year bringing new challenges and new triumphs. But the core mission remained the same: to teach, to protect, to inspire, and to demonstrate that true power came not from fear, but from respect. Not from breaking others, but from helping them become unbreakable. In the end, the bullies who'd tried to break the new teacher had instead broken their own cycles of cruelty. The woman they'd seen as weak had shown them what real strength looked like, and in the process, she transformed not just a classroom but an entire school community, proving that sometimes the most powerful lesson isn't found in any textbook, but in the courage of one person standing up and refusing to back down. The story of Miss Elena Rodriguez would be told for years at Jefferson High, embellished and mythologized with each telling, but at its heart would remain the simple truth that a teacher with a black belt in Taekwondo had used her greatest weapon, not her fists, but her unshakable belief in the power of change, the strength of compassion, and the possibility of redemption for even the most unlikely students. And in room 237, future students would continue to discover that the greatest battles aren't won with violence, but with wisdom, that true strength protects rather than destroys, and that every person has within them the power to choose who they become. Elena had taught them literature, but more than that, she taught them life. And that was a lesson that would echo through generations. Long after the last bell had rung and the classroom lights had dimmed, the legacy of the teacher who stood her ground would live on in every student who found their voice, every bully who chose a better path, and every person who learned that real courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. In the end, that was the greatest lesson of all, that we all have the power to transform ourselves and our communities, one brave choice at a time.